Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Goose Hunting and Scouting Masterclass here. We've got Mr. Corey Loeffler from the DRC Call Co. And we're just going to give it a few minutes for people to roll in here. Remember, your video is off, so you can't. We can't see you. We can't hear you. If you want to add questions into the chat, use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. Don't use the chat except if we're just talking, but we'd love to see where you're from, what you're looking forward to hunting this year. And Corey, what's first on the agenda for you?
Oh, as far as hunts go,
Yeah.
North Dakota just opened up, so I'm gonna try sneak over there. The combines are out in full force right now, just pulling off some of those early grain fields, and I think the birds are finding them. So it sounds like North Dakota's been off to a really slow start up till this point, but for the most part. Yeah, it's looking like it might turn around here real soon. So kind of excited to dust off trigger and get out there.
Yeah, it's been a few days since we've been out in the field, so I'm looking forward to it.
You bet.
So another reminder is we've got some giveaways. We're going to be giving away a handful of onX Hunt t-shirts, and then Corey is going to be giving away a DRC
this whole lanyard, or just one call, not the whole thing, just one call.
Sorry. So if you don't want to win Corey's lanyard, no, you can we'll post a link here in the chat if you want to enter to win some onX Hunt shirts as well as a DRC Call Co. company or call. So you can win the whole company too.
Yeah, come on over.
But yeah, so it looks like we've got a good number of people in here. So let's kick it off here. So kind of the topic for today is how to scout and hunt for geese. And we're going to kind of break it down into early season, mid-season, as well as late season. And, while we are based in the north, Corey's had the chance to kind of hunt all over the country. So we will speak regionally a little as well. But, Corey, a lot of a big question a lot of people have is, where do I start, right? Like I want to go goose hunting, whether that's on a trip or close to home. Like what's kind of your first step? Let's say you're in a new area or you're looking to go to a new area. Kind of what is your first step to finding how to find geese?
Let's see. The first step, well, for those of you that don't know, have jumped on, my name is Corey Loeffler. I own DRC Call Company, started that back in 2007. So I've been making calls full time for about 15 years. Like Ben said, I've had the opportunity to kind of hunt most all over the country and many parts of Canada. So I kind of want to just jump into a goose hunt, like Ben was talking about. We're going to go on a hunt, and what do we do? What's the first step here as far as, I don't know what the number one is. So we've got to pick an area. Right now, coming up on September, a lot of our early season states, or a lot of the states that are real popular for early season have opened up or about to open up. As far as I know, I think North Dakota is the only one open right now, but a whole bunch of other states plan to open up in the first few days of September. So for you guys that are looking to drive up north and hunt the Northland, some of the bigger areas or bigger concentrations of where the birds are going to be are where there's good nesting opportunity and where there's a bunch of really good agriculture and good ag fields and good small grain fields, predominantly wheat and barley fields, or maybe some summer followed or preventive plant cornfields from last year, but basically all of the agriculture heavy egg areas. So an area that would be not a good place to go hunting would be like the northeastern part of Minnesota, where it's just all pine trees over there. That's what pine trees look like on X maps right there. So not a great place to look. Not many egg fields over there. We're going to take a look at the western side of Minnesota. We're going to look at North Dakota, South Dakota. That's where we're going to find our egg fields, our good prairie pothole region, higher concentrations of birds. And you can see Ben has a bunch of different crop layers turned on this map right here. So that's going to give us a huge advantage. Those crop layers are giant for many different types of hunting, especially Canada geese. So when you get out there and you put actual boots on the ground and you start hitting the road and you're driving around looking for those birds, you'll be able to see what fields they're in. And they might be in fields that were like last year's crop layers. So this year in 2022 might have been a wheat field. Is it still, Ben, is the map still 1 year behind on the crop layers? Oh, I don't have you on audio right now.
There we go. So generally with, so it is a year behind right now. So you are seeing last year's crop data, but kind of what I tell people is, we're especially up in this area, we're honing in on wheat and, up in North Dakota, probably some canola as well. So what I like to do is use those crop layers to not necessarily find like the exact field, but find areas that have a lot of wheat in it. So for example, like, you take southeastern North Dakota, there's going to be a lot of corn and beans, right? Because it's super profitable. It's going to be harder to find wheat. So if you're going to a new area, like, and you're just trying to figure out where to go use that to find areas that they plant a lot of wheat, because then there's going to be more opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. You can find the general area of where you're probably going to find more birds. Like if we're going on a road trip, a freelance road trip, and we're venturing out from home, we're going to another state or another area, somewhere we haven't been, we want to just find a general area. Maybe join Delta Waterfowl and get the magazine with the membership and read that a bunch, and that'll help you out too. They post they write a bunch of articles, informative articles about freelance hunting and hunting all over the country. So publications like that, magazines, that's going to help you to kind of narrow down an area of where you want to go, or maybe you have some friends or family members that can provide a little bit of local knowledge to tell you if the birds are or aren't around there. So then once you get to the area, then you're going to want to narrow down the crop layers and find out where the birds are at, what field they're in. Oh, okay, they are in this year's wheat field or barley field. That was last year's corn field or soybean field. And so, okay, generally crops in the same area are gonna rotate similarly. So we can turn on the corn layer or the soybean layer, and hopefully those are now wheat or small grain barley fields this year. And that's going to probably let us really hone in and get real specific on where we want to focus our scouting efforts.
Corey, what is it like when you're looking on the internet, like what in terms of water for roosts, because they need food and then they need water for roosts, like, are you looking for a lot of little ponds, like maybe a few big lakes? Like what, in your experience, what does that look like?
Early in the year, like late August, early September, I really like to look for really big bodies of water. The bigger, the better, predominantly because there's so much more shoreline on those big bodies of water and long stretches of river. That's where all those little family groups of birds were nesting all year long. And then they're gonna venture out to the river or venture out to the lake, and then they're going to mingle around and they're going to join up with more birds. So you just have a lot better opportunity of finding a 400 bird feed somewhere versus a bunch of little ponds might only find a 30 or 40 bird feed. And hunting in the very early part of early season before the molt migration has started, we can get into that in a little while. But if you're just hunting local birds, you want to be able to hunt a bunch of them. The bigger the feed, the better, because they are so unpredictable that I've hunted a lot of 100 to 150 bird feeds when only one decided to show up that next day for whatever reason. They'll just completely switch fields. Who knows why, but I don't. And if I did, be a millionaire, I'm sure, or whatever. But so in the real early season, especially that August season, you really want to find the biggest concentration of birds that you can. And it's not always that easy. You have to put on a lot of miles and do a lot of internet scouting, e-scouting with onX to try to find those areas.
Yeah. And one thing, so we're using this webinar to help prevent, the last thing I encourage you to do is go onto a Facebook forum or an internet forum and ask, where should I go? So you're here, you're at the right place. We're going to show you how to not ask that question so you can go out and figure this stuff on your own, because, if you've ever been on any waterfowl forums, it can get pretty bloody. So
a little dicey asking, where should I go hunting on my freelance trip next month? Yeah, not great internet etiquette there. So we'll help you out.
For sure.
So another really cool aspect of the early season is that molt migration is really kind of a pretty unique spectacle, and predominantly most I would say popular with that greater Canada goose migration. It's just sexually immature birds that travel way up into Canada to molt, lose their feathers, hang out up there all summer long. They can't nest where they were born, like whatever, if it's in Minnesota or if it's in Missouri, they're not mature yet. So they go fly up to Canada, lose their feathers up there. And then they usually come back to come hang out with mom and dad and their new family the early part of September, or depending on your geographical location, it could be any time in September when they show back up. For me, way up north, right by the Canadian border, it's usually that first week in September, we see a pretty good influx of molt migrators coming through. And like I said, they're all like 1 and 2 year old birds for the most part, and very uneducated, haven't been hunted yet this year, probably. Maybe just the random group of Canada hunters up north, but probably haven't been hunted. So some really, really good hunting opportunity in the month of September, all throughout the country, basically. So able to put a lot of meat on the ground. Usually on those conservation seasons or resident seasons, the limits are a lot higher too. So you can see a 5 to 8 to 15 bird limit in a bunch of different states. So that's a good chance. 15 Canada geese in one day. I mean, that's like shooting one deer a day as far as pound for pound, talking, that's a lot of meat. So,
I like it.
Yeah.
So all right, let's just say we found these areas that have wheat, there's a lot of food for them, whether it's wheat, canola, barley, etc. We found a few good bodies of big water. We get to the place. Where do we go from there?
Well, we're going to need to find the landowner. So if we've got a feed,
we're in the area. We haven't even
we're in
found
the area. Okay,
yep. Just we're going to the hotel. Let's
drive around. Okay, so in let's call it September, the early season. Birds are going to be flying in the cooler part of the days, or that's when they're going to be feeding and in the fields, because heat is their enemy this time of year. They really don't have any way of, they only have two ways of heat regulation, and that's through their beak and through their feet. So they don't want to be flying any long distance midday. That's why you'll see a lot of birds feeding very close to their roost or their loaf. And that's why they will establish a midday loaf. And to talk about that a little bit, a roost is going to be a bigger body of water, safe. They probably haven't been hunted on that body of water this year or within the last few weeks. A safe big body of water. They're going to spend all night out there. And when the sun breaks the horizon in the morning, they're going to leave that body of water. It's going to be fairly cool, probably one of the coolest parts of the day. And they're going to head out and they're going to go to probably a small grain field. Barley is one of their favorites. If you can find a barley field, there's probably geese on it. That's a really good one, or any type of a wheat field, or there's a few other, early season crops that are pretty popular. But
and that's just generally because, corn, beans, all the other ones haven't been harvested, right?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So they're probably they'll fly out to a small grain field and they're going to eat. And then what they do after that could be one of two things. If they're really close to their roost, they're going to fly back to the roost and go sit out there. If they're not real close to the roost, let's say they flew from the roost out to their grain field to go eat for the morning, they flew over a cattle pond and it was a 3-mile flight to get over there. Well, they're probably going to come back to a cattle pond or a smaller body of water to hang out throughout the day. Really, all they're doing on that loaf pond is they're just cooling down. That's really all they're doing. So they're going to sit on that loaf pond probably from about 8:30 in the morning, maybe 9 in the morning, and all the way until they fly to go out and feed for the evening. So this feed pattern this time of year is pretty much always a 2-a-day feed. So they're going to feed in the morning early before it gets too hot. They're going to beat out the heat of the day by sitting on that loaf pond, and then they're going to fly again right before dark after they've cooled down. And then that way they can get to the feed. They'll build up some heat getting out to the feed, and then they can feed. The sun goes down, cools off, and they can fly back to probably their roost where it's safe at night. So that's kind of that's the schedule, the typical schedule that we look for, especially true on a clear day, not a cloud in the sky. The only curveball I can throw at you with that schedule is when you get some precipitation, midday precipitation. If it starts to sprinkle at 2 in the afternoon, those geese that are sitting on that loaf are probably going to take off and fly out to the field that they had planned to go to that night, which is probably going to be the field that they were in the morning if they didn't get hunted or spooked off of that field. So if they don't get buggered off of the field, they're probably coming back there. So that's another good scouting tip when you do find those birds.
So let's just say we showed up, it's like noon right now. When will you, like couple hours before sunset, will you start driving around, or what's your approach there?
Yeah, depends on how how clear or overcast it is. So it just depends on the day. If it's raining, there's going to be geese flying or out in the field feeding already. If it's clear and sunny, 78 degrees, they're going to be sitting on a body of water, a small body of water, and they might be pretty tough to spot because a lot of those little bodies of water, like a cattle pond out in the middle of a cattle pasture, typically it's going to have mowed or grazed grass around it. So there's nowhere for you to sneak up on them. It's a very safe place. Those geese use their necks to their advantage. So when their heads stand straight up tall, they use that to their advantage so they can see predators coming in. So if there's CRP grass around this cattle pasture, they're not going to be able to see anything approaching them. So typically what you'll find on those loaf ponds is short grass, around a cattle pasture, and that's kind of where they're going to be hanging out. It might be tough to spot them on those little ponds because they're typically, a lot of them are man-made, and the soil bank is built up around the edge of the pond, and those birds can hide in the middle and away from eyesight. So it can be tough to spot on there. That's where you'll want to watch them fly from their morning feed out to or when they're done feeding in the morning. It's probably going to be, depending on the day and the temperature, but it can be anywhere from, say, 8 in the morning until 11 in the morning. When they're done feeding, they're going to be flying back to either a loaf pond or their roost. You're going to want to follow them with your map open to see where they're headed to, because you might just be following them and they went around some woods somewhere, if there's some trees, and you just lose them and you have no clue where they went. You expect them to be flying back to their roost and they're gone. They're not. Well, that's when you need your map open to see, oh, there's a cattle pond right here. I bet you they're sitting on that cattle pond. And another little tip, little top secret information, don't tell anyone this, but geese, like 99 times out of 100, they will decoy so much better into a loaf pond than they will into a grain field because of the heat thing. So they need to get down, they need to get in the water, and they need to cool down, especially on those clear, calm, probably clear, fairly calm, sunny days that are, the high might be 75, 85 degrees. They have to get down and get into that water. So typically, if you can find that location, you can find that spot, it's probably going to be really good, and they're going to come in with zero hesitations, and they're just going to bomb into the water.
Because like you said before, is geese are notorious for flip-flopping fields. Like, you've got them pinned down that night before, and there could be 500 of them in there. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden the next day, they Houdini you.
Yep.
So I found, if you can find a good loafing pond, like that is the trick.
Well. Absolutely. Yep.
So when you're driving around, Corey, like, are you just driving around? Okay, there's a flock of geese. Like, let's follow where they go. Is that kind of your deal?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. If I'm new to the area, I'm going to go try find some bodies of water. If it's noon and we want to go for a drive around, I'm going to be glassing every single body of water that I can look onto. Hey, where are the birds? They're probably going to be, they'll probably land in the middle, and then they'll swim to the edges, and they're going to be just eating some grass throughout the day and just kind of filling their crops with a little bit of grass, a little bit of gravel for their gizzards, but that's about it. So I'm going to try and glass around the edges of those bodies of water, try find some birds, and then, hey, we got a few birds located, so we're going to be able to time them out and then follow them when they leave their water source and head out to feed. Be able to follow them, and then, like I said, likewise, if you're driving around and you've got a couple spots and then you see another flock of birds heading somewhere else, well, by all means, get over there and get underneath those and follow them to wherever they're going. And you're just looking to drop pins, because what you're doing while you're following those birds and dropping pins wherever they go to feed, you're looking for the biggest feed with the best hide. That's the whole goal behind all this stuff, is finding where they're going to go and then hiding from them when you go decide to hunt out there, if you can get permission and have access to the field.
So, Corey, like, obviously it probably depends on what area you're in, but what constitutes like a feed that is big enough that you would hunt in the early season specifically?
Yeah, in the early season, and this is very regionally specific number and time specific number as well, because different times of the year you're going to need way bigger feeds to shoot enough birds. In the early season, hopefully they're flying around in family groups of between 4 and 12 or 25 birds. And if you found a group of 150 to 200 geese feeding in a field, well, that's probably going to be a lot of fun shooting those birds because you're going to have a lot of different volleys while they come in. But if it's October and the big migration's on with the lesser Canada geese, EPP birds are coming down, and there's a feed of 150 birds, well, that's probably one flock of geese. So it's going to be a one and done situation for the morning, and it's not going to be a whole lot of fun. So 150 bird feed could mean something way different in September than it would, say, in October, November, December, or from Minnesota to Texas. It's going to be way different. In Texas, it's nothing to find a 3,000 bird feed, and then we got it going on. So
yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So we found the birds in the field.
Yep.
We've got eyes on them. What are you doing looking at that field? What are the things, different factors you're accounting for when you're figuring it out?
There's some questions that we need answers to, and these are questions that you should write them down. Should always have them on the front of your mind while you're scouting birds, because we need to know, well, do we have permission? Okay, we get permission. We've got land ownership data on onX maps. We need to utilize that and get a hold of the landowner. If we can, we're going to drive to their house. You have a much better chance of getting permission if you can drive and talk to them in person. If you're able to drive to their house, show up. I like to show up with no camouflage on, wearing plain clothes, try to look my best. I don't drive a super muddy truck into their driveway, because the image that you portray to them is what they think you're going to do to their field. So if you show up and you're mud head to toe and your truck is mud head to toe, they're like, I'm not letting you out in my field for a mud run. Like, you think I'm an idiot? Like, no. Well, they don't have anything to gain by letting you hunt their land. So put yourself in their eye, turn the tables and put yourself in their shoes, and think of what it would be like if this, scuzzy hillbilly shows up with mud from head to toe all over his truck. Like, hey, you can let me shoot them geese or what? Like, no, why would I? But if you go up there and you're respectful, you try to dress nice and try to look good, drive a clean vehicle, and just chit chat with them, try to become friends with them, and have a conversation about something other than hunting and something other than those geese. Try to find some common ground with that landowner so that you can just talk to him for a little while, and then bring it up that you're in the area doing some hunting, and you want to chase some birds on their land, and that you'll be respectful, but leave it better than you found it if you get permission, for sure. That's the number one rule. You don't want to wreck it for people in the future, and it's happening more and more all the time. So yeah, we need permission. And then we've got to answer a few other questions after we get that permission. What's the hide going to be like? What's the wind going to be like? Where are the birds feeding in the field exactly? Drop a pin exactly in the middle of the feed. And then where's their roost or their loaf? So where are they going to be coming from in the morning if we plan to hunt them in the morning or in the evening? So we need all those. And then how do we access that spot in the field? How do we get there? Are we taking a wheeler? Are we driving right there? Are we walking in? Where's the field crossing? If we're going to drive to it and we have permission to drive vehicles out there, well, then we need the field crossing marked with a pin so that we can drive right there. We need to know if there's ditches that we have to cross, like all of those different things that are a lot easier to figure out the night before when the sun's up versus at 5 a.m. when you show up in the dark and you don't have a clue what you're doing or where you're going. So it looks pretty obvious when the sun's up, like, oh yeah, it's just here. There's the geese. They're right off of this point, right by this dip. And then we can enter the field right here. Well, then you show up and it's pitch black. You don't have any landmarks to go off of, nothing. You just literally have your map and the pins that you dropped on your map. So drop a bunch of pins, label them, put, however you want to do it, put them in folders, put them, label them, put some notes in there, and that will help that early morning cluster, if you will.
So Corey, I'm going to share my screen here and give people a little example. And I want you to walk through it and tell me what you would do.
Yeah.
In this scenario. All right. Can you see my screen all right?
Yep, there we go.
All right. So this field right here is where we found birds. We have permission on it.
Okay.
The birds are roosting right on this blue pin here on this lake helmet. Let's go. What are you doing?
Well, we drove by. We got permission on there. How in the world are we going to get there? Are we coming in from this north side over here, or can we drive right in the split between the fields to the left?
Looks like on the east there's no road.
Okay. How about right here?
There's a road approach right here.
Yeah, there's an approach. Perfect. So all we got to do is we can access right there. We don't have any mud to go through. We've got that small pond that we've got to steer clear of, but we hook around that pond and we basically can get right to that X. It looks to me like the birds are going to be close enough to this field edge. We might want to run some A-frames or utilize that field edge right there to our advantage with the hide. We'll have to let the birds fly over our heads and then we'll have to call them to us. So depending on the wind tomorrow, we might set up A-frames right. Yeah, we might set up an A-frame right there. And if we don't set up an A-frame, I would say we run ground blinds with our backs towards the roost, so we're shooting away from the roost. That's another big thing with early season, is watch those gun barrels and watch that noise. You don't necessarily want to set up exactly with the wind, so you're shooting straight downwind every single time, no matter what. If you're only a half mile away from the roost, you don't want to be shooting towards it. Otherwise, it'll be, like I said, a one and done type of morning, and then it's game over. So
you can use the line distance tool for this. I do this all the time, right?
Oh.
So like, for example, here, this roost is 2.5 miles from where they would be feeding theoretically, right?
We can
it might be a different story if they're roosting here.
Yeah, absolutely. We can shoot any direction that we want to. We don't have to worry about where that sound is going to blow them off the roost. 2.5 miles is definitely far enough. So, but I'm really liking that fence line or the grass edge between the two fields to hide in and then shoot to the east, I think. So let the birds. It's kind of one of my favorite hunts, as long as the wind is going to allow for it. One of my favorite hunts is to set up where the birds have to fly straight over the top of you when they're coming off of the roost, and they fly over the top of you, and then they get out front, which is downwind, and then you hook them with the flag and some sharp calling and to spin them around, and then they fly over it and they hook you into the wind, turn a 180, and then just kind of work into the wind and work into the decoys, and you call them in. It's like if they've flown over the spread once, they just seem to be super comfortable with it. And as long as the spread and your hide looks good from the backside, they just get so much more used to it, and they're a lot less hesitant to bugger out. So
Corey, where, in terms of, you can kind of see the terrain in this field here, would you want to pick a higher point to set up on in the middle of this little saddle here? What would be your approach to that?
I don't like to set up on the very top of those of any of the hills out there in that field, just because the hide, you're really going to sacrifice the hide if you set up right on the top. The birds will really be able to pick out the ground blinds or an A-frame from a long ways away, and there's just nothing to really your backdrop is just so bad. So yeah, I think the way you're looking at it right there, that looks pretty good to me. It's kind of on the side hill from that hill coming from the left going to the right. We're kind of on the side hill there. We looks like we'd have a great hide. The backdrop looks on the maps. I mean, it looks pretty much perfect. So
Yeah, and so like the one thing I use a lot, especially west of the mountains, is, elevation is often hard to see in 3D. So if you're on your web map, which is on the computer, not on your phone, but you can use this 3D exaggeration.
mm-hmm.
So I mean, this is what it looks like, but this doesn't give you a whole lot of perspective, right? I mean, it's pretty flat.
Yep.
But when we were looking at it, I went in and jacked up the elevation. You can see everything just getting more pronounced. Just helps you figure it out in the field, especially visualize it. You show up late at night type deal, and you're not quite sure. This will give you a great perspective of what you've kind of got coming the next morning.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, that's an awesome tool. I like that.
So from here, Corey, do we want to transition? Should we go through in terms of the season scouting for geese in like the middle, like migration time, or do you want to just take it all the way through hunting tactics in the early season?
Let's see. I know there was a lot of different questions that had came through about decoys. So everyone wants to know about decoys. I know.
Yeah, let's just go in the early season.
Yeah. So if we were going to go hunting out there, basically on my spread, I try to have everything available so that I can hunt every single day that I have the opportunity to hunt. So the weather might not be perfect. The migration might not be perfect. It might have rained 3 inches last night. I still want to go hunting. And especially if we're doing some filming and we've scheduled camera crew 3 months in advance. Well, they're here for the next 4 days. We have to roll with the punches and play the hand that we're given. So I'm going to try to have most every decoy, every style of decoy that I know is going to be applicable to that situation. So if it's dry and we're driving in fields, I'm going to use something just like this right here. This is Dakota decoy, fully flocked, full body honker. Now, full body honkers have their pros and cons. They're big. It's huge. It's the size of a goose. So probably going to need a trailer to haul these things in. And then they're going to be a pain in the butt to walk into a field if we can't drive in there. So you can only carry about, comfortably, you can carry 12 to 20 of them at a time. So, mobility is an issue, but if we can drive the trailer right out into the field, well, by all means, that's what we're going to do. And we're going to dump these things on the ground and set them up. So I run a fully flocked decoy because they completely soak up all of the sunshine and they do not shine whatsoever. That's a huge belief of mine, is the shine that decoys emit. And you're gonna run into some painted decoys or some silhouette decoys that are going to shine a lot in given situations, and that's really going to be tough to kill birds and get birds close to those, because I believe that as the geese evolve and as they get hunted, more and more pressure all the time, I think they're so used to picking out the shine off of decoys, because that's one of the probably the biggest telltales of a goose decoy versus a live goose in the field. Live geese in the field just hardly shine at all. Only in a very certain circumstances, they almost don't shine whatsoever. These fully flocked birds don't shine whatsoever. So I'm going to run these if I can. The birds will decoy into them. They'll key in on them, and they'll land with them with zero hesitation, and they'll they'll land, and as long as you're hidden and stay still and you want them to land and don't shoot them, they'll land and they'll get to eating and get to feeding, and they'll just get to hanging out with these things. They'll start pecking on them and fighting with them. So they treat these full body decoys as they would treat a live goose on the ground. So that's nice if you're band hunting. You can see I've done a fair bit of that in my day. The biologists don't really like it when you do that, but you know what? If they didn't want you to do it, then they wouldn't put those shiny things on their legs. So, so yeah, when the geese are coming in, and usually it's when we're hunting with these decoys, when those geese are coming in and they drop their legs, I'm scanning all their legs, trying to pick out some bling down there. And that's the one I'm going to shoot at when I pop up. And there's different rules that different groups of guys have, but hunting and seeing jewelry and calling it out and shooting, but you guys can figure that out if that happens. So that's what I'm doing.
So yeah. Corey, all right, so let's just say we've got full bodies.
Mm-hmm.
How many are you running? Like, what's your ideal number? What can you get away with? What does that look like in early season specifically?
Yeah, in the early season. So I'll really kind of match up the number of decoys to how many decoys do we have. Usually it's not an unlimited number, especially when it comes to full bodies. Guys only have so many. And I really just want to put some decoys in the field where I don't want the birds to be. And that's the mental process or thought process that they have going on that time of year, is that now turn the tables quick. You're now a big old gander goose that's flying with your little ones that you just worked so hard to hatch out all year. Well, if you're flying, geese are super mean. They're pretty nasty creatures. So when you get on the ground, you don't want to bring your whole flock of little ones into some big old mean gander that's another adult that's on the ground, because it'll beat the tar out of all your little ones. So they typically, and now this is getting like kind of a little bit dicey, because there's a change when that molt migration starts to come through, when they really change their behavior pattern. So I'm talking predominantly the family groups, the local family groups. They don't like to land right with the other birds because of how aggressive some of the adults can get with all their little ones. So they're not gonna, what I'm saying is they're not gonna take their toddler and throw it into a mosh pit at a Slipknot concert, right? So you don't want to do that. So they're probably going to land short, and that's a very hot topic for early season Canada geese. What do? They keep landing short of our decoys. Maybe your decoys are a little bit too aggressive looking. That's something else that we can go into. So the posture of the decoy. In the early season, I'm going to keep all my sentries, my big, like, I think they're the coolest looking birds. I'm going to keep all those in the trailer because they're way too aggressive for that early season. I'm going to use feeders, and I will actually throw in some sleeper shells in there, which is totally weird. Most people think I'm just a nut job when I start pulling sleeper shells out in September, but a sleeper shell, there's a lot of birds that will hit the ground. They'll eat right away, but they'll end up tucking in and taking a nap out in the field if it's a cooler day in September. But that sleeper shell decoy and a feeder decoy is a very non-confrontational style of decoy. So the birds have come in there and land next to those decoys. They're more likely to, with no hesitation, versus a big bull sentry Canada. They're not going to land face to face with that thing, or they don't even really want to land by it. And if they see too many of those, they're just going to land 75 yards or 100 yards short and just say, no, you guys are good up there. We're good over here. You guys go have your mosh pit. I'm going to keep the little ones safe back here. So I try to use as many head down style of decoys as I can just to show a real relaxed, non-aggressive flock on the ground. And that's the posture, the style of decoy.
And how does that translate into, using those principles you were talking about? How does that translate into how you're setting your spread? Is it you're going to be super tight, or are you going to have kind of wide open family groups? What does that look like?
On the in the early season, I'll set them up, couple 2, 3 here, 5 or 6 over there. So very family group oriented, a ton of area in between. So a lot of people want to hear me say, run this A pattern spread, run the U pattern spread, or the T pad. They want a letter to reference so they can know how to set their spread up. I've never been a letter spread kind of guy. In the early season, my spreads would resemble a U shape, but I call it the old runway strip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a line of decoys going out this way and a line of decoys going out this way, and they're going to like V out basically, and just kind of family group it out. And it's just going to be this big, huge runway that the tips of the spread, downwind tips of that spread they might be 100 yards apart. So I'm going to give those geese in the air a ton of room to land and a ton of room to work their way in. And then I'm going to hide somewhere in one of those lines, or up, if it's like a U kind of a shape, I'll hide right up in the middle of it, somewhere up there, and I'll hide in some decoys up there. But probably I'm going to be hiding in one of the lines, and I'll just have just a few more decoys where we plan to hide. If it's an A-frame style, I won't have like the connection of the U at all. I'll just have a line going out this way and a line going out this way, and it's just so obvious to the birds in the air of where it's safe to go, and they're more likely to come closer to the hunters, closer to the gun barrels. And that's really the goal with all of it, is just to get them as close as possible so that our shots are more humane and we have less cripples and all that.
Yeah. So in that situation, birds are notorious for doing what they want in the early season. They could, they do whatever they want. So yep. You've got that setup going. How are you getting them to commit where you want to? How are you pulling them all the way into that V or the U versus just short stopping you at the tips?
So geese will definitely short stop me. I'm not saying I'm perfect. They do what they want. And the reason they do is because they haven't really been hunted at all that year. There's no pressure. The food is literally spread all throughout the whole field in pretty much an even form fashion. So there's no reason for them to come and land right in with a tight flock of decoys and compete for food, because there's no reason for any type of competition. They just really want to get to the same field that other birds are in, because it's probably safe, and they'll just kind of set down wherever. So it's usually a battle to try and, you're battling with the birds in the air to try to get them, to entice them to come closer. And a lot of times I'll use a longer style honker call. The call that I make, I don't have one on my lanyard right now, but the call that I make that I typically use in the early season is the life sentence. It's got a long mouthpiece. It has a longer insert. It's super easy blown. It's a very mellow tone. And it's that big, giant Canada goose honker sound. The mature giant Canada geese. So it's going to be all the mating pairs. It'll match the tone of those. It's not tuned to mimic the young, the hatch ear birds, the young of the year birds, because it's like going to a 8-year-old kid's birthday party. The adults are over here, the guys are hanging out around the grill, having a couple pops, and all the kids are screaming their heads off in the pool. But it's like, just be quiet over there. Just go play, have fun with your friends, go play and squawk around. But like the real conversation is going on over here at the grill, where we're solving the world's problems and stuff. So that's kind of what I like to, that's the analogy that I like to use. So I like to match the tone of those big honkers and just communicate slower and more methodical with the big birds. The adult birds, just some simple clucks and moans. That's hunting sounds. That's especially in the early season. There, you don't have to do anything fancy. You don't really want to do anything too fancy, and you don't want to sound super aggressive. You just want to sound confident and that, hey, this place is safe and we're just hanging out. We're doing the deal. So
Are you beating up on them, getting aggressive on the call, or is it just, honked, clucks, moans? Like what does that look like?
Yeah, pretty much just clucks and moans. This might be a little bit loud in here. I don't know what it'll sound like, but typical early season calling fashion. My speed, my volume will kind of go up with some peaks and flows. I'll get real excited and then I'll kind of slow down and calm down. I like to keep it fairly realistic. If the birds are looking like they're gonna stop short, if I'm like throwing the kitchen sink at them and they're set on landing 100 yards short of the decoys, I'll actually start blowing a bunch of really odd crap that doesn't sound like geese to actually kind of spook them and to like make them feel uneasy. And I mean, this is the entire kitchen sink. This is like, no, they're probably gonna land. So this is my last shot. This is my last chance of trying to get these things in here. That's worked from from time again. More effective is like if they land on the other side of the field, the more effective way is to send a dog after them, and on a huge back command, which takes a fairly advanced dog to run a half mile across the field, spook up the birds, and then when they do spook them up, get on the flags and the calls super aggressive and then pull them back in. That's worked a time or two. But as far as calling in the early season, those clucks and moans are going to be keeping it super realistic and just kind of peaking that speed and peaking that volume if you need to get their attention and falling back down. So
I think
how's that sound?
I think it was peaking. It was cutting out.
Totally crazy. Okay. I was trying to blow the quietest call that I had. I wasn't sure how it would come through, but so that's super basic notes in the early season. It doesn't have to be fancy, real slow, just a lot of clucks and moan sequence, and that's just like the two adults, the breeding pair talking back and forth. It just shows a lot of confidence and a lot of safety in the field, which we're trying to lie to them, and we're trying to paint this real safe picture. So
cool. Yeah, love it. So I don't know if there's anything else on the early season you want to wrap up on, but I'd like to get to kind of the meat of the season as well as late season here. I know there's a lot of people that's where they spend their time hunting.
Absolutely. So. Yeah. So some of the differences between that early season time frame and the late season, we're probably going to need more decoys. That's generally speaking, we're going to be hunting bigger flocks of birds, bigger feeds, and we're going to probably need more decoys, especially if you start traveling down south into Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas. Those guys run huge spreads of decoys down there. So where some of our spreads in the Midwest of 2 or 3 dozen full bodies in the early season, those birds down there wouldn't even blink at them. So then it's either going to take a whole bunch of different trailers of full bodies, or we're going to be running probably some silhouette decoys. And I'll run a bunch of silhouettes up here if it's super wet in the fields and we're walking in. That's my walk-in decoy. I've got probably 20 or 25 dozen dive bomb silhouettes in bags. And I think this year I'm going to switch over to their fully flocked version, because a silhouette decoy, a painted silhouette decoy, there's going to be a time of day on there when the sun starts coming up or going down. If you're hunting in the evening, there's going to be a time in there when those things are basically just like giant mirrors out in the field. And I've seen it happen. There's a time of day when there won't be a goose that wants to come within 400 yards of those things. And it's just, you just kind of sit there, scratch your head for a little while until the sun changes positions. Or you can maybe try and rearrange the decoys. So that's one of the drawbacks about using the silhouette style decoys versus the full bodies. But transportation and mobility is definitely a huge benefit with the silhouette.
So taking a step back, we talked kind of about finding areas that worked in the early season. How does that change? Does it change your perspective on what you're looking for if you're going out on a new hunt to a new area? Is there anything different you're looking for?
Yep, we're looking now for cornfields. Definitely for cornfields, because you got a really good hide, and typically there's going to be a lot of birds in the. Here we go. Let's hit the layers and see where the cornfields are at. But yeah, typically in that October time frame, the birds will probably be hitting soybean fields, and they can get pretty tough to hide in. That's a little bit of a struggle. That's when you're going to want to utilize your field edges, your pond edges, and really get creative with your hides. It's extremely difficult to hide in the middle of a bean field, especially with some pressured birds. You can get away with it with very unpressured birds, with just parking an A-frame or a panel blind style of a blind right out in the middle of a combine and work chisel plowed soybean field. Usually not a problem if they're fairly unpressured, but if there's a lot of hunting pressure around, they're going to be pretty difficult. So
what about in terms of so you've got cornfields, what about in terms of like roost water? Is it, again, you're looking for the biggest stuff, or does it matter as much?
When the migration is at the peak, it doesn't matter as much. You're still going to find your traditional roost locations that the birds have been using all year. So it's where the birds where you were finding birds in September. There's probably going to be birds there again, and then they're going to open up a bunch more stuff too, and you're just going to find a pocket of a random 1,000 or 2,000 birds on this random body of water. Like North Dakota, it could be kind of anywhere. The roost locations is probably going to be where people don't hunt as much or can't get to, or it's a little bit harder to hunt, safer. And yeah, they like new roosts are just going to pop up kind of every week. There might be some new birds in the area. So it just kind of goes back to the importance of scouting and just getting out there and putting those boots on the ground.
And then what changes from scouting? I mean, are you probably not as concerned with those 100 bird fields anymore necessarily?
Right. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. You're looking to hunt, might be looking to hunt more like 500 to 1,500 bird feed, especially if they're little birds. Typically, the bigger the birds are, the smaller flocks they'll be in. The smaller the birds are, the lessers, cacklers, and Richardsons, all the little subspecies, the bigger flocks they'll be in. So it's nothing to find a flock of big giant honkers. There'll be 25 birds, and a flock of lessers, there'll be 250 birds in one flock. So basically, you want bigger flock sizes so that you have more volleys, and you can shoot into those birds more times the next day to put more birds on your plate.
Yeah, and another interesting point, going back to your watching a field, is this is a way that I've gotten in trouble before. Is you're sitting watching a field, and all of a sudden it's just one big pile of geese that come in, especially with little geese, because I don't know, they've got minds of their own as well. Like they'll just say, "Oh, I'm going to go do something else," but ideally what I'm looking for is flocks of whatever it is, 25, 15, 25, 30, but multiples, right? And then I don't know about you, but coming from different directions as well. Like for me, that's a signal that this is a great feed. There's birds from multiple roosts using it. So that makes it more, more enticing that they're going to continue to come back.
Yeah, absolutely. And it just, it kind of prevents that group think mentality when you have birds from multiple roosts in the area all coming into one field. Well, if one of those three roosts gets up all at the same time, because say someone jumps it, someone drives a duck boat out there at 5 in the morning and busts that roost. Well, that's, if you're hunting, if all of your birds are coming from one roost, well, then all of your eggs are in that basket. And if something happens to that roost, well, you're kind of done for the morning, or it's a one and done kind of a deal. So if you have a few different roosts to pick from, I mean, that's absolutely the best scenario that you can come up with right there. So.
And then does anything change? Like we found our field. There's a pile of birds in a cornfield. Does anything change in terms of your mindset of how you're going to set up? Whether it's blinds, obviously decoys is going to change, but is there anything changed there from the early season that we talked about?
If it's our crop is going to change to probably shift to corn and beans later in the season. So it's going to do a few different things. Our birds are going to be a lot better to eat because they've been off of pond scum for a lot longer. So, and they're going to have more fat on them, which these are two very good things. Another is that a cornfield, typically, you're just going to have so much residue or trash out in the field. Not physical garbage, but I mean the corn stalks out in the field. You're gonna have so much more trash to utilize in the hide and stuff in your ground blinds or whatever style hide you're gonna use. There's just so much more available than there would be in a wheat or a barley field, or definitely in a soybean field, which is there's next to nothing out there. So cornfields, awesome for hiding in, and really location is everything, but hide is a very close second. So as long as you're in the right spot, all you really have to do is hide from them. That's the only other thing you got to do. The decoy spreads and the calling and the flagging usually takes a back seat to hiding. Like that's the name of the game. So I'm always going to pick a smaller feed with a better hide versus a bigger feed with a crappy hide. Always going to pick that better hide because you're always going to have birds work way better in there. So I've set up, I mean, I've definitely set up in fields, like one field closer to the roost where the birds were coming from, because they're feeding in this twice chisel plowed wheat field, and it was super wet and it was an absolute junk hide out there. And I knew it was going to be horrible. And we just make a mud mess out of everything. So we set up in a stubble wheat field that was one field closer to the roost. It wasn't exactly where the birds were going, but I knew they were going to fly over us, and I knew that we'd be able to hide our ground blinds out there, and we whacked the heck out of them there. Where if we would have set up in that twice chisel plowed, which is basically a pretty much a jet black field, there's no possible way we were going to hide out there, and that's all we had to hunt. So we went, tried it out, and it worked great. So hide is definitely it.
And that doesn't matter if it's early season, mid-season, late season. Like you can't hide in a field. I've seen it. I've tried it. Like especially bean fields, like you talked about. It's like it doesn't. They'll suck you in, right? With like there's 5,000 birds in this bean field. They're right in the middle. Like I got to go try it, and real tough, tough.
Shouldn't have burned your daycare day on that one. We should save those daycare days. They are precious.
So, back going now, transitioning to decoys and calling. We touched on decoys a little bit. I wanted to go back. Like, one of the things that I saw pop up in the questions is like, are you mixing like the dive bombs with full bodies as well, or what does that look like? Are you just trying to get as many numbers as you can out there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't mind mixing the full bodies with the silhouettes. If it's going to be kind of the wrong day for silhouettes, then I'll just try to not use them whatsoever. So if it's going to be super clear and sunny or some dew, if you're going to turn that silhouette into a mirror, I don't want to use it. It's just, I've seen it time and time again, and when that sun comes up and it starts shining off of those decoys, and they act like mirrors out in the field, and you really have to be careful of positioning every single one the right way in order to prevent that from happening. A fully flocked decoy is something that can help with that for sure. Will soak up that sunshine and not reflect it back. But silhouettes typically, here's what the mistake that I see guys making is that they'll go out scouting, put boots on the ground, they're driving around, they find a feed, they look at the feed with their binoculars. Well, if you're doing that, you're looking at this feed from a two-dimensional point of view. You're looking at it from right here and you're looking all the way across the feed. So it looks like these geese are just packed right in here. It's black. You can't see through the flock. Well, they're not that close together. I promise you. Put a drone up over the top of them and come in and see how far apart those birds are, and then do that, and then put a drone up and look at your decoy spread the next day. I'll almost guarantee you that your decoys out there are 5 times closer together than what those birds were the night before. And it just has, you think they're tight, and you think the birds feeding out there are super tight together just because you're looking at them with binoculars and they look like it. But so spread those decoys out a long ways, especially the silhouettes, because what the silhouette's going to do is, it's depending on the time of day, it's going to cast a shadow onto the ground. And honestly, the most visible thing from the goose's point of view from in the air, the most visible thing is the shadow on the ground. It's not the decoy itself. So I really like the black and white silhouettes myself, because they look like a shadow, and then they also cast a shadow onto the ground. So you can use it appears that there's way more of them out there than there actually is. So you get more bang for your buck, so to say. They don't carry the realism as a full body. So you might have to shoot your birds a little bit different, or put them off to the side of your spread, or somewhere where the birds really aren't keying in on their attention. But from an advertising perspective, from getting the birds' attention from a long ways away, those black and white silhouettes are very effective. So kind of find a spot for those. Those are probably the only decoys that I would kind of segregate from the rest of the flock, would be the black and whites.
So calling now for middle of the season towards later season, what's that going to look like? Multiple callers, throwing everything you got at them. What's the story?
Typically, the early season, big, deep honker sounds. You're trying to mimic the adults. Mid-season, you start to go up in speed. So you want a bunch of different callers mixed in there, and you want strong calling, and you want a whole bunch of them. The tone itself, like deep honker tone or mid tone from an EPP bird, which is like a 7-pound bird. The tone isn't very specific, doesn't really matter a whole lot. And then once we get into late season, a really high pitched tone tends to be more effective. And then the speed and the pitch as well. So continue on with that speed of the calling and the amount of callers into the late season, and I would just go up with the pitch of it, just because birds have been hearing the lower tones kind of all year, and it's just something different. Typically they're more pressured during that late season, and especially the guys down south in Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, some parts of Nebraska. Well, that's the birds that you're hunting, are the little tiny birds, and that's the pitch that they really key in on. Is so the call that I make is it's called the short drop, and super popular down south. Those guys, absolutely, guides and outfitters down there absolutely love that call. It's a really short, super aggressive, short, super high pitch aggressive call that really matches that tone of lesser cackler. And I'll mix some of those in. I'll mix those short drops in even when we're hunting big honkers in Minnesota late in December. I just really like the way that high pitched frequency cuts through the air. It travels a lot further, and it's just something that they don't hear time and time again, and really is very effective at getting their attention. And And that's kind of what you're trying to do during that late season, is just break them off of a flight line. They typically will kind of have this lunch line mentality, and they'll get up off the roost and they'll just all head nose to tail one direction. And if you can get underneath that, and say you're not hunting on the X, if you're hunting on a traffic field, you're just really trying to just get their attention and pique curiosity, break them off of that lunch line and get them to come and check out your decoys and your spread. So
yeah, for sure.
yeah.
So we could, I mean, there is so much nuance in goose hunting. We could sit and talk about this for like days and all the different intricacies, but out of the sake of time, we're gonna go to questions. And first, Corey, I'd like for you to cover kind of, I know you've had a chance to read a lot of the questions that folks have sent in, and maybe address a few of the main ones. But before that, I just want to remind people that we're posting the giveaway link in the chat here. So if you want to go in and get entered to win a shirt or one of Corey's calls, be sure to click that link and enter below. So Corey, what are some of the questions that you saw in the chat that piqued your interest that you want to address?
Probably the majority of them were spread shapes and mixing silhouettes with full bodies. I think we covered that pretty good. Yep. So we'll continue on there. Another one was learning the basics, learning how to calling instructionals. How do they get started on a goose call, and what's the best goose call to get started on? On the calls that I make, that life sentence goose call, I'm going to be using it in the early season here. It's a very good beginner style call. It's got a long mouthpiece. It's got a long insert, very smooth blowing, great honker sound, and it's just real easy to break over. So in the early season, I'd say a longer call is going to be a little bit more effective, and it's a lot easier to learn on. I have a free calling instructional on my website. I also have a free some recipes and a free cookbook on the website as well, so you guys can check that out. That's drccalls.com. The calling instructional is right on the homepage. You punch your email address in there, a link to that calling instructional gets emailed over to you. I go over all things goose calling. There's way too much involved with that we don't have the time to cover that stuff right now. So grab a goose call and sit down on your couch or at home with your tablet or phone, and you can just practice goose calling in the privacy of your own home, which is a lot better than at an outdoor show or the retail store. It gets a little bit intimidating there. So, yeah, we have those for you guys on the website as far as learning stuff. But recipes on those birds, that's probably the one question that I got intrigued by the most, like what my favorite recipes are. I have definitely the free recipes on the website are probably some of my favorites, but some things that are definitely overlooked would be the legs and thighs of those big honkers. That's my favorite part of those birds to eat. And the favorite time for me to shoot them as far as table fare and providing the best meat for my family is that December, January, real late season honker. They've been on corn and beans for probably 3 months almost, and they just pack on the fat. And honestly, from where I'm at in northern Minnesota, I have to travel that time of year, so I'll usually go traveling and I'll bring home as much as I can, especially the fat from those birds. I'll render that fat down from the big honkers and from the ducks that we're shooting, render that fat down and live on that stuff all year. It's delicious. So there's a lot of parts of those birds that are overlooked and a lot of times thrown in the ditch that very good. So
yeah,
legs and
sure.
thighs. Street tacos out of the legs and thighs. I highly recommend that.
Love it. I'm getting a lot of questions, people wondering what you're shooting in terms of gun, chokes, shells, kind of what's your go-to?
My go-to is less cripples. That is my motto. So I want the highest performing patterns, the best patterns that I can possibly shoot. I had my guns gone through by Rob Roberts. He did forcing cone work in there. That's going to improve the patterning. Also the choke tubes. So I know what I'm shooting as far as patterns go. I pattern these guns a lot. I like shooting 12 gauge later in the season, and I like shooting a 20 gauge earlier in the season. Always shooting copper plated Boss Bismuth. They're it's a great company. They're awesome friends of mine, and the best bang for your buck, pun intended on that one. But that copper plated Boss Bismuth patterns the best out of these guns. You can control the pattern with the choke tubes, and it's the hardest hitting shell for the best price that I've found. And
What shot sizes are you shooting?
My favorite, that doesn't matter if I'm shooting 12 gauge or the 20 gauge. My favorite has always been 5-shot. So I'll shoot 2 3/4 inch 5s out of the 12 gauge. I'll shoot 3-inch 5s out of the 20 gauge. It's almost the same load for the most part. And late season, when those birds, when those geese have a bunch of body armor on them and the fat's super thick and the skin's getting tougher, I'll shoot. I'll go down to probably a 3-shot, like a 12 gauge 3-inch 3-shot, which is going to pattern the same as a 2 3/4 inch 5-shot. You're just going to have a bunch more kinetic energy in each BB and get a little bit more penetration with each one. So a lot of people kind of find it a little bit alarming that I shoot such small shot size at big honkers. I mean, that's predominantly what I'm hunting all the time is big geese. But if you were to think of the actual target of what you're aiming at on that goose, I'm not aiming at the body of the goose. I'm not aiming at the breast muscles at all. I've photographed hundreds and hundreds of these things getting shot with really fast shutter speeds, and I can tell you that if you're shooting them in the breast and past that down towards the tail, you're not killing them. It's not good. Don't do that. Don't try to do that. The target that you're aiming for with giant Canada goose, they're so hard to bring down, especially in the late season. You're aiming for the head, the neck, or the wings, the flight center or the command center. You have to be aiming for those. So you're pulling out in front of the bird, depending on the distance, 18 inches to 6-8 feet, well, 6 feet for sure. Just depending on distance and how the bird's flying or whatever. So know your shot, know your pattern, and know how to get out in front of that bird so that you can put those BBs through where they need to get put. Like smaller shot size is going to give you a more full pattern, and then you're trying to hit the smaller targets of that bird with that small shot size and that full pattern. So that's totally opposite train of thought that was popular back in the day of shooting number 4 buck at a pass shooting goose or something like that. Like all these guys think you need elephant guns to bring down this big goose, but you know what? You don't, as long as you know what your patterns look like. Pull the pattern out front, lead that bird more, shoot it in the head with small shot size. That's what I recommend
100%.
right there. Mm-hmm.
Corey was talking about his gun earlier, that Rob Roberts gun. As an onX Elite member, if you go in and look at your Elite benefits, we've got a great partnership with Rob Roberts that you can get a similar upgrade to what Corey has. You can save a little money and have a much better performing gun. So we'll post a link in the chat if you want to check out that partnership we have with Rob Roberts. So with that, Corey, I'm just looking through the questions here. We didn't touch on this a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking more hunting on the X, but what are some tips for running traffic?
Typically, running traffic, you are trying to change the bird's flight path and pattern. They've got a plan in their head that they're going to get up off the roost and they're going to head probably to the field that they were in the night before. As long as it was a safe feed and they flew off of there naturally back to the roost, that's pretty much what they're going to do tomorrow, or the next time that they go out to feed. So we have to, if we're not hunting where they want to be on the X, if we're hunting somewhere halfway in between there, we really have to focus on hide, even more so than we're focusing on it when we're hunting on the X. So we're going to, being that we don't have the X to hunt, so location isn't in our favor, we're going to have to really, really, really focus on the hide. So they absolutely can't see anything at all. Otherwise, they're just going to come in a little bit, get curious, look, see something they don't like, and then just revert back to plan A, and that's to go back to where they were feeding the night before. So hide is super, super important. And calling strategies and flagging strategies are basically just going to get elevated one more notch up. So we're going to get more excited with the calls. We'll hopefully have more calls in more people's hands, and all the hunters are going to have a call. We're going to be screaming at the birds a little bit earlier than we would be if we're hunting on the X. So if we're hunting on the X, the birds are already coming in. So all we got to do is just don't screw it up, basically, because they're coming to us. So if we're hunting a traffic field, we've got to change their mind because they're probably going to their X. We got to change their mind and get them to come and check out our spread. So calling more aggressive, flagging more aggressive. We're going to be flagging like crazy as they're flying by until they break their flight path and they piques their curiosity and they say, hey, what's going on over there? We better go take a look. Now we're going to calm things down just a little bit and just really read the birds. So you have to be very kind of sensitive about what the birds in the air are doing. Are they working their way towards us or are they not? If they're not, we're going to pick up the flagging, pick up the calling, get more aggressive with it. If they're coming, well, then we'll just keep letting them come, and then we can calm down just a little bit. So we don't want to show them everything we got the whole entire time that they're working their way into the spread. We don't want to just keep throwing the whole kitchen sink at them while they're coming in, because then if they come in and things just aren't really looking right, well, then we don't have anything left to throw at them. We can't pick up with more excitement because we're already throwing the kitchen sink at them. That's everything we got. We don't have anything more to give, and then it's less likely to work out. So I always kind of go about it with the mentality of I'm going to give them the very least that I possibly can. I'm not going to overachieve it every single flock that's coming in. I'm just barely going to get by, just give them barely enough to come in and commit. And as long as it's working, I'm just going to keep on doing that. And then as soon as it stops working, hopefully I got more to give them, and I'll give them more flagging, more excited calling. And that's, what I usually try to do.
Yeah. Awesome. So we've got, let's just hear, we've got another one. We kind of touched on it earlier about hunting loafs, but a lot of people maybe don't have a field set up. Mm-hmm. What are some tips for putting yourself in a good situation to shoot geese on water?
On the water, hopefully you got it usually doesn't take as many decoys on the water. So, 12 to 18 floaters is a pretty good water spread, and you're going to be hiding on the shore. So hopefully you have a place on the shore to put some full bodies, and the majority of your spread is going to be probably right next to where you're hiding, and it's going to be, full bodies on the shore. There's so many different situations that we can go into that maybe you don't have an opportunity to put full bodies there because it's cattails or something like that. But those floaters out in the water, that's like the flock of birds that just landed. So you typically don't need that many of them because it's just like one flock of birds. So it could be just a dozen, 6-pack or a dozen or something like that, just to let the birds in the air know where the last flock just landed, because they're probably going to land just on the outside of those birds. That's what they typically do. They'll come into the water, they'll land in the middle of the water, and then they'll swim their way to the edge. There's some some wrenches that I could throw into that scenario, but typically that's what they're gonna do. So just a few floaters, and then your land decoys, your full bodies, and your silhouettes or whatever. But just find a place to hide. Those cattle ponds, they can be tough, because if they had cattle in there or horses, if they had them in there and they grazed it down to not much of anything, that can be the trickiest part of some of those ones that I've hunted in the past. And sometimes you can get away with just throwing an A-frame up right on the side of it and just brushing it in really well, and just putting that thing right out in the middle of the pasture, and they don't think twice about it. So different areas, different situations, different geese. There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, but
I hear you.
That's what I would do.
Well, we've got a time for a couple more questions. If you are getting into it for the first time, you're getting into goose hunting, limited money, what would be your approach to building up a spread, whether spread, calls, etc.? What would be your approach?
The internet and trading forums, buying used gear, talking to guys, watching stuff like this, checking out different Facebook groups and seeing what people are talking about. Try to learn as much as possible for free. YouTube channels are awesome. One that comes to mind, Hulk Outdoors. He's out there beating around on public land all the time, and that's a really good. There's a whole bunch of different YouTube channels out there that you can learn a lot of stuff from, and then you'll be able to narrow it down, what decoys you want to use, and then you can try and find those on the marketplace, trading groups. Try and buy some stuff used, so you can just buy it, maybe 40% more for your same amount of money, and go that route, and that'll just kind of lessen that investment just a little bit, and you can just keep on adding to it. But you guys can go out and hunt with no decoys if you want. It's not as fun as hunting with decoys. But you can call at birds and get them to swing around with a bunch of curiosity and scream at them with the goose call and just hide in the fence row. I mean, it works, and it's a blast doing it. They're just looking around like crazy, trying to figure out where the heck this noise is coming from. Like, shooting one goose like that is super rewarding. Something that you called in with to nothing with just a call. I've done that as one of the first birds that I ever killed. I still remember it to this day. Not a decoy around, but had that old fluke goose call just ripping from that fence row, and we whacked him. But just to get out there and just to get out there, experience it, and just start learning, there's just nothing like actually doing it, and just getting out there. That's where the best lessons are learned. So
for sure. Well, so lastly, where can people follow you, and more importantly, where can they follow Boone, Rue, and Bonnie, your labs?
Yes, much more importantly, follow the dogs this season. They live a way more exciting life than I do. But I post a bunch of stuff on my Instagram page, which is just Corey Loeffler, and the website. My website is drccalls.com. Also, the DRC Call Company Instagram page and Facebook page. We post, we're pretty active on all of those, and you can find a bunch of different information on the website. That calling instructional that I talked about, that's totally free. The cookbook, product catalog, download, that's totally free, all on the website. So there's a bunch of good information out there. We've got the calls. We talked about all the scouting. We've got the recipes. So really all you need is just a dead goose. And I mean, that's the whole package right there. So.
Oh, fantastic. Well, this webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So if you missed something, you showed up late, in its entirety will be posted. So you'll be able to check that out. Corey, any parting wisdom for the folks?
Oh gosh, I think I just spilled it all out in the last hour and a half. I'm about spent right now. Oh man, ear protection. Oh my gosh, that's some parting information right there for you. Do not pull a stupid move like I did and ignored hearing protection for the first, I don't know, 26 years of my life. That was not smart. I have super bad tinnitus, and I'm running an All Clear Audio electronic hearing protection right now. They also have another non-electronic that's under $200 price point. Oh, if I would have known that when I was 20 years old, man, I'd have bought them things 10 times over again, because it is not fun having hearing as bad as I do at 38 years old. I would not recommend that. So go get yourself some earplugs.
I hear you. Well, Corey, we really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. I know there's a lot of folks that have learned a lot of things, myself included, from today. So
Thank you guys.
So have a fantastic season, and to everyone else out there, hopefully you can use some of these tips, some of these scouting and hunting tips with onX, and have a successful season. So I appreciate it.
Thank you much. Thanks, guys. See ya.